Cool. So by way of introduction, my name is Martin Jones. I'm one of the directors of Fruition IT. For those of you that don't know us, although looking at the names here, I think most of you will. So we're a tech and change recruitment business based in the heart of Leeds. And throughout the lockdown period, we've been running a series of sessions that we've called Lockdown Learning. Ordinarily, we'd be really active in the kind of tech meetup scene and hosting large events and also roundtables. Obviously, the restrictions have put a bit of an end to that. So we thought, well, let's try and just move online. And we've done a whole heap of sessions. I think this is about the 13th, 14th session that we've done. Some of them huge events. Largest one was Leeds United in Tech. No surprise there, I suppose. 200 people dialed into that one. This one today is all about who or what is driving digital transformation in your organisation. And this is going to be a panel discussion, and we've got some questions which have been pre-prepared, and we'll kind of lead the discussion through them, as well as some questions that you sent in. But I'd like it to be very much interactive. So first it'll be interactive amongst our panel, who I'll introduce shortly, and then at the end I'm going to open it up. So that moves us on to the panel. So first of all, thank you to the three gentlemen that have joined us and agreed to be part of our expert panel. Today we have Mr. Dave Jones, who's the Director of Digital Wow and a fractional IT Director with a huge amount of experience across a range of industries. We have Keith Blundell, who is currently Director in the Cloud Enterprise Platform Division of Wipro, and previously IT Director at TransUnion. And Adrian Stanbury, who is Director of a consultancy called AxiLogic and currently the interim CIO of Selfridges, who we've been working with for a couple of years now. So again, welcome you three gents, and thanks for joining. So I guess we'll kick on to the first question, really, which is quite a general one, which is, could you just kind of talk us through what the impact of COVID-19 has been on the organisations that you either work for or work with in general, and specifically around the impact of COVID-19 on the direction of the digital agenda? So Dave, you're top left on my screen. I'm not sure about anyone else, but we'll come to you first.
Okay, thanks, Martin. So I do quite a bit of work for different sectors in my role as a fractional IT Director, and as chair of the Northern IT Leaders, I speak to lots of different CIOs as well. I think from my perspective, working with a lot of kind of traditional sectors like manufacturing, probably the biggest impact's actually been the shift in culture. I think culturally, manufacturing companies in particular have not been geared up to enable working from home in general. I think there's been possibly a lack of trust or belief that the employees can go away and be productive and be left to it and carry on working remotely. But possibly the biggest impact has been that change in culture and realisation that actually, if you enable your employees to work remotely, they can be as trusted as if they were in the office, and actually they can be more productive. In terms of the digital impact, I think it's probably in those kind of sectors. First of all, obviously the trust element is there now. They know that people can be trusted and productive, but I think the boards in those kind of sectors will be looking to medium, longer term digital transformations, and just seeing this change in ways of working as a bit of an enabler.
Okay, and Keith, what have you seen as the kind of general impact?
So I think two separate answers to that question. I think for Wipro, already a fairly distributed organisation, quite used to colleagues working in different countries, working from home, working in different office sites. So I think that felt quite familiar, although it had some of its own challenges. I think when you're certainly from a leadership and culture point of view, where you might have had offshore teams that were quite task orientated, if you try and turn that to normal home working, it's not necessarily gonna breed the right culture to work from home. So a shift in thinking, and again mirroring what Dave said, is very much been about the people. I think in organisations I've been involved in, it's mainly been retail the last few months, but my background is very much in banking and finance, and I think again, people and culture has been huge to it. We've seen organisations in the middle of major transformation programs, and it's done one of two things really. One, make them look at whether they were rightly prioritising those programs, and in some cases, yes, some cases, no. And where it's yes, you know, let's power on through this and get it done. Where it's no, let's, you know, point our energies at the right places. And I think, again, certainly in the financial space, the challenges from working from home are very much around data and security, what your policies in the office that are drummed into you, you know, can feel less familiar when all of a sudden you're in a different environment. And actually it's critical to take advice from organisations like the ICO, etc., and make sure you're, you know, still working the same way from home. So yes, I think for us it's been two-dimensional.
Absolutely, there's some common themes there. Adrian, how about you? I guess in retail, it's really easy to see if a shop literally shuts its doors, and then that is, I guess, easy for anyone on the street to understand. What have you seen kind of in the IT function?
We had to shift gear quite quickly and shift from being long-term strategic to being very tactical. So roughly speaking, looking at the operation, which is roughly an operation side and a delivery of change side, conservatively, we stopped all programs delivering change unless they had a sort of break fix element of our operation. I think we did that for two reasons. One, because it was quite clear that stores were going to close, and therefore we had to think really carefully about cash flow and budget. And I think all businesses have had to do that. I know with my small business hat on, we straight away started to look at cash flow and viability. And as part of a large business, Selfridges, we did exactly the same thing. We also weren't sure how effective we would be at delivering change and working on large programs remotely. We'll probably come on to that a bit later on. I think in retrospect, much of our operation has actually been more effective remotely than having people in the office. But that doesn't mean being pessimistic. I think it's a long-term solution, but we'll probably touch on that later. Operationally, we shut all of our stores, which put massive pressure on digital. So we had to do a lot of work tactically to make sure that the digital arm could cope with the extra traffic. And indeed, it had to cope with a lot of extra traffic. Operationally, it was just mentioned by, I think, Keith, we had to do a lot of work just to make sure that our team could operate not only effectively, but safely from home. So in terms of data loss, security, all of those things, we've seen a massive rise in phishing attacks and that kind of activity, or attempted anyway. And as much as we trust our staff, you know, there's a sense of security when you're in the office versus when people are acting remotely. And we had to take steps to make sure we could manage our IT estate when it was remote and sort of off grid. And then finally, from an operations point of view, you know, we had to make sure that we could access and allow our business to work. So we had to rapidly roll out solutions that allow our teams to work effectively. But all of that was in quite a tactical mode. So I'd say our horizon dropped from being 6 to 12 beyond months out to being, what do we need to do to secure business viability, both cash-wise, but also operationally, you know, week by week. And I think we're only just coming out of that now. And now we're starting to lift our horizons back up to thinking more mid and long term again. But I won't lie, it's been very tactical since March. And I think that's the right thing to do to protect business.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that's really common amongst lots of the organisations we deal with. I think have gone into that kind of mode too. So what I want to come on to is whether COVID-19 has been a big wake-up call for lots of organisations, and I guess what the surprises were. I'd like to ask you first, Dave, because obviously you kind of work with a whole range of organisations. So was your phone ringing and with lots of companies kind of going into a bit of a panic mode?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think most organisations have had quite a lot of work to do to cope through COVID-19. I think what I've seen is the organisations that have, I guess, done things properly and spent time on putting proper disaster recovery and business continuity practices in place and regularly testing them and making sure they work are the ones that have been best placed because they've found the issues that they need to invest in, and they've had, I guess, when you do those kind of things regularly and test your DC and BC plans, that you identify the areas that you need to invest in, and you've got a good business case to put to the board to address some of the issues that might come up. And that's what we've found in a series of CIO interviews we did, is that a lot of people had invested in remote working prior to this, and as much through good luck as anything else, in quite strong positions. But the opposite end of the scale is the ones that haven't, and they've got a DR plan on paper, but they don't test it, so it's not used to really invest in the right things. They're the ones that really have been in panic mode, and they've had to go out and purchase tons of laptops and get them configured quickly, and maybe increase VPN licenses or firewall capacities depending on what kind of infrastructure they've got compared to the ones at the other end of the scale. But I think it's fair to say that hardly any organisations have probably had pandemic planning in the BC plans and tested at that scale. So I think every organisation's had something to do, and most organisations aren't really set up for everybody working from home tomorrow type scenarios. But there's certainly been some that have been in better positions than others. In terms of what's next, I think it's fair to say that lots of organisations now will have done what Adrian said, and there'll be a pivot to tactical, what do we need to do for the next 2 or 3 months, and a lot of the strategic stuff may be put slightly on hold. I think I'm starting to see the other side of that now, where obviously all the remote working and stuff's happening, and the tactical stuff's hopefully bearing its fruits, and now it's a case of what have we put on hold. We refocus now and reprioritise based on what the new world looks like. So yeah, in short, it's had a massive impact on every organisation, but some have been better placed, and they're the ones that have invested in doing things properly around DR and BC. And again, traditionally, there'll be some sectors that do that well and invest a lot, and others that see it as less of a priority.
Absolutely. And Keith, what do you think about maybe the difference between huge organisations and maybe the smaller ones? Have you seen amongst maybe the organisations that you deal with and the fact that you work for, has there been a different approach?
I think the common theme is going to be business continuity and disaster recovery as well. But certainly business continuity, we've really seen the difference between I think every organisation I've worked with over the last few months has had some sort of plan, but it's been whether it's a plan tested by, we had 3 people working from home for 3 hours today, or whether it's a truly tested plan and that uncovers issues. I think you start to see the little things where, actually to do that you have to come into the you have to come into the office once a month to connect to the network physically, otherwise this doesn't update, and that might be your antivirus, or it might be, and just little things that people aren't considering start to come out of the woodwork. I think the other thing that has been an eye-opener even within the bigger organisations is how quickly people have gone a bit native on tools, perhaps. So if that continuity plan and the communication, which I think is key back to colleagues at home, isn't consistent about what tooling to use, whether that be for VC or messaging, it was very quick to start seeing people setting up WhatsApp groups, or and where in some organisations that might be fine, in others, you've got to consider that data position. And I think the only way, the big eye opener for me and the big difference was making sure you were getting consistent and regular communication out about how to do things, and responding to challenges of people working in a different way as quickly and again consistently as possible.
Absolutely. I think I totally agree with you about the tool selection. I'm not sure about everybody else here, but I feel that if someone wants to say something to me now, they have maybe about 12 different places that they could write it. Yeah. And I often know that someone has sent me a message, but it takes me like 10 goes of searching to see where the actual the message was before I stumble across it in Teams Messenger rather than the Teams group or WhatsApp. Absolutely. Or by text. Adrian, how did you find it at Selfridges? Was there did you just put into motion the pandemic action plan, or was there a bit of a wake-up call for you?
Yeah, luckily I just finished writing it before. Thanks. We were joking in the office the other day, actually, metaphorically the office, that if this whole issue had arisen maybe only 5 years ago, coping with it would be much more difficult. So, the prevalence of tools such as Teams or Zoom or whatever, they're quite readily available now. I take the point made by Keith. I think the issue of a shadow IT, these tools are really easily able to get hold of. People can, use them locally. That's a bit of a worry. So, look, I think through the lens of management and technology, I think most businesses have probably pretty quickly got used to this and have started working effectively. I think what's become more difficult is oversight and leadership. So oversight of those ways of working, I think, as a CIO, can be a little bit worrying at times. Understanding what data is going where and what tools are being used to transmit that data can be a bit of a sort of keep awake at night moment. I think leadership has become really difficult. I think management is quite straightforward. In actual fact, whilst everybody's working from home, and actually just on that remote working, everyone's going, remote working is great, my business is actually working better. And I think it's probably okay whilst everyone is working remotely. As people start to come back into the office, I happen to think that actually a mix of office working and remote working will be far more difficult than having everyone remote working. So I'm not yet sold on the whole remote working is the way forward. I think that socio kind of disparate view between office workers and home workers will need to find its new normal. At the moment, everyone's a home worker and that's kind of found its new normal. So that kind of works. Back to the leadership part. Leadership for me was kind of walking around the office, talking to people, being visible, you know, really extolling the values, those kinds of things. That's really difficult, however way you cut it. Being a leader online, I think, is a quite tough ask, to be honest with you. And I think where we've really kind of focused is on the sort of mental well-being of our staff. So being productive is one thing. So being tactical and saying, right, we're not going to do this, we're going to focus on that is one thing. Having the tools to do that is another thing. Coping with staff who are finding it tough working from home, and then also working with staff who are being furloughed because we took that tough decision as well. That's quite difficult as well. So, you know, can you talk to those staff? Should you talk to those staff? How do you talk to them? It's quite difficult having a wholesome conversation when you're staring at a screen. I don't know if that sounds old-fashioned, and I apologize if it does, but, you know, talking to someone to comfort them about the fact that they've been furloughed for not because of them, but because of the tasks that we stopped, and reassuring them and talking to them about when they're going to come back to the office is more difficult. So I think technology, relatively easy these days. Oversight, scary. Management, yes, possible, but I think we're going to enter another phase of new normal later this year when people start to go back to the office. Leadership, I'd still categorize that as being pretty difficult. Well, I'm certainly finding it quite difficult. And I don't think these tools allow that to be truly easy. So that's still a challenge for me.
I would add to that. I think I totally agree on that leadership element. That's certainly the thing that I found the hardest, and I've seen others around me find the hardest. I think I'm an ex-army man myself, and a strong believer that high-performing teams are all about pulling together and individuals helping each other when they need help. And that's not so easy to recognise in this new normal, and that's something that to continue driving and leading high-performing teams is something we're going to have to learn. I think that you're right too, Adrian. When it starts to be a mix of office and home, it's a different ball game again.
Yeah.
Cool. How have you all seen technology used to help this? So any kind of innovative or just really robust applications of technology to assist in the remote working, whether that's around collaboration, productivity, or the business continuity and information security side?
I think just taking on from the point raised previously, I think obviously most organisations have pivoted to being in the office and seeing people most weeks or most days or whatever it might be, to working purely on new tools. And certainly some of my clients had Teams, etc., but didn't really use it, so it was a case of having to put it out there quickly. The technology certainly is there now, and I've been quite pleasantly surprised by how quickly it is adopted and how easy people find it to use. So Teams has very much been part of the fabric in the organisations I work with, and the daily meetings in somebody's office has obviously been replaced by Teams. I do agree though that you do lose that intimacy. Even in some of my clients where I work quite closely with IT managers or IT directors in an advisory purpose, when you're not there face to face and or you're not on site, you do lose some of the intimacy there. But yeah, I think most organisations have put solutions in place quickly. I'd go as far as to say as a lot of organisations have actually become more collaborative because they've started running all kinds of social events and obviously things like quiz nights and stuff like that have been really popular, and they've started to get a little bit more inventive as the longer we've been in, because I think every man and his dog will run a quiz night in some form, and then they've just got more varied and interesting as we've gone, and wine testing and gin testing and all kinds of stuff happening. So I think in some ways it's actually made, certainly at the start of it, teams come together more and become more collaborative and maybe do even more stuff out of hours than they were doing previously. So I think that's a plus, but there will be a new normal. Some of my clients are starting to come back into the office a couple of days a week now, as you are, Martin. Others have stated that they're not going to be back in until probably next year.
Absolutely. Keith, what do you think is here to stay, and what do you think will just get left to gather dust afterwards?
So I think, and I hope certainly the use of collaboration tools is here to stay. And I think while most organisations already had them, I think what we've seen is the accelerated use and actual expertise, and you know, much wider than IT, how your businesses and different businesses start to utilise those collaboration tools both internally and with their clients. And I think positive and well used collaborative tools, as that methodology can be built into the way we work and the way everyone operates. I think that's a great here to stay. I think the challenges around what we might lose again are more around people and the keep you awake at night stuff. You know, data integrity, where that data is, who's using it, how it's being used. And I think we will see nervous security directors and security risk officers thinking very hard about what type of roles can or should work at home, and better control from data officers about how that data is flowed and owned. And I think we'll see some roles where they've been forced to work from home due to this period. We'll see a definite shift back into the office at some point. I think the other thing on a people point of view is and a leadership point of view is the control. It's difficult enough in the office to keep a diary that doesn't run 8 till 9, 9 till 10, 10 till 11, 11 till 12, a lunch meeting, etc. And that's all the more easy to do when you're working from home, I think, and difficult for a leader to see if that's happening necessarily to your team members. And therefore hard to, you know, when you're walking around the office and you're seeing things, it's easy to say, you know, have a lunch, have a break, you know, you can see how people are reacting, responding, and that will become tough.
Yeah, actually that kind of it's touched on. Andy and Nick in the chat have just kind of commented, and one of the comments Andy mentioned is that the challenge is the intensity when you're at home. There's no reset between meetings, which, yeah, I think that absolutely was happening, certainly when we were kind of completely all remote. And it is too easy just to be sat in front of Teams to the point where you can't even form a word anymore because your throat's so dry. Megan, what do you think, now that we're kind of 3 months on, what's the strategy now? Are you starting to change from that kind of tactical approach to looking at strategy again?
Yeah, I think we are. So obviously we've, you know, from a Selfridges point of view, they recently opened their stores 2 weeks ago, which took a lot of time and investment, you know, amount of IT that went into that. But again, tactical IT, right? So how do you judge the size of the population in a store? You know, lots of different things, heat sensors, temperature sensors, footfall sensors, escalator sensors, like more data than you ever know what to do with. So that was all done. I think now, as I hinted a while ago, we went really tactical, starting to lift up. So we're now through the lens of trying to think about how we remobilize the work that we paused. A lot of commercial work went into pausing. As you can imagine, we work with a lot of vendors. Some vendors were very in tune with the situation. Others, let's just say, weren't. As you remobilize, you face into those same quandaries again. So there's a lot of commercial work taking place. A lot of rehiring people. So when we defrosted or when we paused a lot of programs, it was at the same time we were dealing with IR35 as well. It was just like a beautiful combination. So as we remobilize projects, we've got quite a sourcing activity as well. And then, you know, thinking about what the new normal looks like, I think office-wise, we won't open up until September, October time. And we've got to work hard at the mental well-being of our staff, because I think efficiency is one thing, but I think lots of people feel like they're battery chickens at the moment. You know, you're sat in front of the same screen all day. The diary starts at 8 in the morning and it's 1 hour blocks, and it feels a bit production wise. So we need to really focus on that. Technology wise, I don't think it's altered our strategy necessarily. I don't know if that's the right thing to say or the wrong thing to say. I think the things that we were looking to do still hold water. I think luckily the tooling that we had has pretty well supported the way of working that we're in at the moment. So therefore, you know, I don't think it's necessarily altered our cause. What it probably has altered is some of the how do we do stuff. So the what we were intending to do, I think, is still the what. The when has shifted out a bit. The how we do it, I think we will see more of a mix of working from home or working in the office. I'm really cautious about how effective that's going to be. And we need to invest, I think, in the technology in the offices, because at the moment, everyone is working remotely and everyone's got perfect sight of a monitor like we are now. Everyone can show presentations and you can work through stuff. When you've got 20 odd people sat in an office, the offices we've left behind are ones where it took 10 minutes to work out how to get a projector working and how to get the screen down and all that kind of stuff. You know, how that works when you've got 6 people working from home and 20 people sat in an office, I think we've got to work that through. So I think culturally, it's going to be quite difficult in the new normal, because it'll be shades of grey. We've gone from white to black and we're about to go into that shades of grey. And I think that's going to be pretty difficult to master. And I'm pretty convinced that technology is not the only answer to that. It's going to take leadership. It's going to take ways of working. It's going to take culture shift. Technology can support that to a level, but a lot of it's going to be the how do we use that technology and how do we lead people using that technology. So, yeah, I think the balance is going to need to alter a little bit as we move forward.
Absolutely. Question from one of the people in the audience, from Gordon. So his question is saying that some of the tactical work that's been delivered over the last few months will have created process and tech debt against strategic plans. During that kind of keeping the wheels in the wagon phase, lots of things will got pushed through very quickly. So how do you look at tracking the true long-term costs of those decisions? And actually, that's something that a lot of organisations that we work with have said, that there have been some very impressive pace at which things have been delivered when it's been absolutely essential that things got delivered because they were, you know, COVID related or business critical to allow the business to carry on running. But you know, what is the way that you then assess what the true long-term impact of those decisions is? Keith, what do you think?
So, you know, I think you have to look at each decision individually and be wary of what was purely a tactical decision rolling into a strategic direction without the right control. And you know, you have to recognise what truly was purely tactical, and we will unpick, and what was tactical but the way we're doing it, what was tactical but it's going to become strategic, but the way we're doing it is going to need to change. So I think you have to look at I think Adrian again mentioned it, that in the main, the what we were doing or what different organisations have been doing have remained the same. The whens and the hows have changed a bit differently, and I think that is how you have to assess those tactical decisions. You know, unpick the ones, turn the ones off that you don't need, that aren't contributing to your business or your technology strategy, and don't be afraid to make those decisions. Look at the ones that you want to keep that are adding value. Is the way you've been doing it tactically the way to continue doing it, to build it into your strategy, or do you need to look at it with a different lens?
I think technical debt's interesting. I know what Gordon's saying. I don't think we've actually created that much technical debt. We've put in place tactical solutions to things, but actually that's more been bringing forward future activity and doing it rather rapidly. We've been quite clear, and we made a statement quite early on, which is that we would rather do something well than kind of not try and, you know, than do it, you know, poorly. So we haven't got lots of gaffer tape lying around. We haven't got lots of remedial work to unpick that activity. We were really lucky. I think Dave mentioned it. We happened to have landed a migration to Microsoft Cloud technology, which has really allowed us to move forward. I think if we'd have had to have put in tactical technology to allow us to work effectively together, then yes, we'd be looking at that and trying to unpick it. I think the bigger issue for us is we've actually paused stuff. So we've actually elongated our roadmap. What we haven't done is turn left at a junction when we were thinking of turning right. We've just paused that turn and it seems a longer way away. And I think what we have had is quite an onslaught of kind of bright ideas of things that people in the business want to do. So we've had to put in quite strict processes around sort of portfolio governance and decision making, both be it engineering or be it, business case style. But I guess we may be the exception, I don't know, but I don't feel that we've stored up lots of technical debt. I do think, as I hinted a while ago, we will be looking at that roadmap and saying, have we learned anything that we should be doing that previously wasn't on that roadmap? And I think, I can't, again, maybe the wrong answer, I can't see that COVID has necessarily changed many of the aspects of the roadmap that we were taking. But I think that's going to be reviewed over the next month or so. But in short, we haven't built up lots of technical debt.
Dave, how have you seen the strategy of organisations you work with change? Is anything on that strategy now that wasn't before?
I think first of all, I'd agree with Adrian. I'm not sure there's been too much technical debt accrued, because I think it's been spent in the kind of organisations I mentioned before that weren't ready for large-scale remote working. I think moving forward, there'll be a lot more remote working in some form or other. I think a lot of organisations will be working differently. I think there'll be very few that call everybody back into the office. I think things will be a lot more flexible. I'd be probably more concerned that some organisations have had to move at real speed, and they might not have done things as thoroughly as they might have done, given time to plan things properly, especially around the data and the security aspects. So I think that'd be what I'd review first in organisations, just to make sure that those aspects are have been done properly, or if there's more work required, because I think we will be in a new world. The investments that have been made will support people and more flexible ways of working. In terms of the impact, absolutely, things have pivoted from strategic objectives to tactical in a lot of organisations. Some of the projects I've been working on have been put on hold while COVID's on, and we get people securely working from home. So yeah, I concur. I don't believe there's massive amounts of technical debt in the organisations that I'm working with. I think it's been investment that will support future ways of working. What I am, I guess, on my mind is organisations that every organisation's either working from home or working in the office pretty much now. And again, going back to Adrian's point, what's that going to look like? How that's going to be managed when people start returning is going to be a big issue, because a lot of my clients have kind of set their employees up to work from home and that's it, or in the office and that's it. So there's going to be thought around how we facilitate that in the future, because a lot of people have took a lot of IT equipment home, for example, and that is their office. So what happens when people are coming back a couple of days a week and can't be carting all the IT equipment, the monitors and all that kind of stuff back and forth every other day? So there'll be more thought around investment and what needs to be done there, I think.
Keith, have you seen any changes that have been made around kind of future-proofing or kind of taking the situation, and just any ideas of where people have started to think about what else might happen that could cause this kind of chaos?
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's, as we've all touched on, people are definitely going to be, those who didn't have well tested and well thought through DR and business continuity plans will certainly refocus on them. I think wider aspects of that, things like supplier continuity and supplier succession. It's not just about thinking about your own organisation, but all your organisational touch points. And I think understanding re-looking at what you consider to be your critical services or your critical applications, and ensuring that you've got the right procedures and processes in place if not only you were hit by another disaster of some kind, but those organisations that you rely on are too. And I think that was something, while you were very heavily focusing on how you got yourself and your organisation and your teams back to work, where you were consuming services from elsewhere, if that organisation wasn't quite as prepared, it could have just as big an impact. And I think that's a really important one to consider. I think in terms of working from home, I think the new normal won't be quite as difficult, perhaps. I think, I agree with Adrian and David, that there's going to be differences and conflicts when it gets back to normal. But during this pandemic, it's not just been working from home. Children haven't been at school. Shops haven't been open. Things have been very, very different. So there's certainly every individual and as a leader of a team, you've had a lot more to consider. It's not just, can someone get in their home office or what they've turned into their home office and sit and work. You've had to consider so much more. And I think that's going to be important to take into future thinking about, really understanding your people and your teams and the challenges that they face day to day, because that's what's going to make your business successful. It can't all be about all about that output from a laptop or a meeting. There's certainly we've learned from that over the last few months that people have a huge amount going on, and as leaders you've got to understand and work around that.
Just kind of coming back to the headline for this session, lots of the conversation just now has been around, I guess, enabling remote working. Is it true to say that COVID-19 has brought the spotlight on that exact point, that kind of remote working collaboration, and has that been at the expense of anything else that was planned in terms of IT transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously that's been the biggest focus for most organisations, is enabling that. And certainly in the clients I'm working with, a lot of the other stuff has had to be put on hold while that's being allowed to happen. So certainly in the short term, but maybe the first couple of months, it's absolutely been priority. And well, again, when I listen to other CIOs and the Northern IT Leaders Group, they tell great stories. We had a couple of CIOs from universities on that told us how they'd mobilised something like 40,000 students and 10,000 staff in a week. And you hear that across all different sectors. And again, back to the point, I just hope it's been done in a way that's been thoroughly thought through and is safe and secure. But yeah, certainly that's been the focus for the first 4 to 8 weeks in my experience.
Martin, I don't think that enabling remote working has been done, and therefore we've had to directly from that decision stop doing other activity. I think it's more that the overall impact of COVID, especially in retail, when stores have had to be closed down, the decision has been made separately, more to do with viability of the business, protecting cash flow, etc., etc. So yes, we've had to focus on tooling for staff, but that's not been that's not, everything else hasn't been at the expense of that. It's more that we've had to make a whole raft of decisions for the benefit of the business. And the business is now starting to come back to normal. But I don't think the change curve is finished, because especially with retail, I think the marketplace, we've spoken a lot on this call about how you run a business and how you deliver technology in a business. The marketplace that business sits in may have changed just as much as the workings of that business. So I think retail especially is going to look, unfortunately for some people, but necessarily for others, is going to look quite different. So I think we'll see a lot of retailers who are perhaps more bricks and mortar and less digital are going to find it really hard to survive this. And I think we're seeing that in the headlines now, with some retailers saying they're closing, others going into administration, and others, making really tough decisions about the populations that they employ. So I think the ramifications of this are going to go on for quite a while yet. And I worry about the end of furloughing, because I think a lot of people have been relying on that. I think with positive intent. I don't think people have been hiding from stuff, but that has allowed people to retain staff that, you know, may or may not, you know, have roles to sort of come back to. So I think, you know, we've probably been talking about remote ways of working because for most people on this call and for us, you know, it feels like the biggest change, but actually it's the symptom, and actually the big change is everything else that's out there. So, you know, getting Teams set up or getting Zoom set up was a relatively straightforward conversation. It was very tactical, but it got working very quickly. Then you're into the leadership question. Then you're into the whole, what's my business's place in the marketplace, and should it change? And I think we're now getting into those quite tough decisions. So I think from now into the lead up to Christmas, I think, you know, all kinds of headlines are going to hit the news as different businesses get used to operating. And I think it's going to be pretty difficult as we move forward. And maybe I'm talking more from a retail point of view, but I think lots of businesses out there have kind of lost business already and have struggled to keep going. But now they think they're going to open and start to recover, but the marketplace they're opening into is going to look quite different. So I think there's that macro level change, which we're not yet even getting into.
I've been primarily working the last few months with a big retail chain that is predominantly bricks and mortar and is focused on high turnover, a lot of high footfall, fairly, you know, well priced goods, and a lot leaving the store. They've had a reasonably good time from a technical transformation point of view. There was no better time to implement Oracle Retail than when all their stores were closed. But having no digital channel to sell has been a massive cause for concern for them, and are really having to rethink their long-term strategy in that space. Yeah,
I think Gordon's just made another point as well. I think, you know, business, the relationship between business and the employees that it employs to do its work, I think is going to have to become far more encompassing, because, you know, people, the pulls on people's lives and how they relate to the business they work with is going to have to be examined, I think, a little bit. As we move forward, I think we're going to go to mini lockdowns. You know, we're not through this just yet. As a small business owner, how we work with our teams and on what basis we employ them and how flexible we can be with that is something we're really focusing on. And as I hinted, in Selfridges, a lot of work's gone into the mental health and well-being of our staff and being flexible. You know, you've got people living with parents. We've got, you know, Selfridges is quite a young workforce, and you've got lots of people living on their own in flats in London. It seems really cool when everyone's out socializing, but when you're in lockdown, that's a really lonely place to be. We've got people with young families. I've got daughters who are, well, they feel like they're 19, but I think they're 12 and 11. I think they're 12 and 11. There's the game. But they're 12 and 11. So they're relatively self-sustaining when they're working from home. But you're working with people who got really embarrassed about the fact that a toddler walks into the room while you're on a conference call. And you've just got to really get on with that, to be honest with you. You've actually got to embrace it slightly and tell that member of staff, look, deal with that, right? I'll still be here when you come back. So I think the relationship between you and the people that work with you, for you, the people that you work for, it's just going to have to, I think, start to just become a slightly more fluid relationship. I think, therefore, expectations on staff in terms of the tasks that need to get done need to be clear and really crisp. How they get done, I think we're going to have to move away from hourly Teams calls to get tasks done and just relax a little bit and let our staff get on with their work. Equally, as a member of staff, you've got to not feel guilty about the fact you're not on a screen for 9 hours a day. You can actually get on with your work in the same way that you would have done in the office. So I think we've got lots of maturing to go through. And as I said, how that plays out when a certain percentage are back in the office and others aren't, I'm not quite sure, but that's going to take a lot of leadership to get through that.
Just a question for each of you to answer in turn. What would you say the biggest lessons that have been learned during the kind of the COVID-19 period, and from a CIO's perspective, have been? Dave, you kick us off, please.
Probably to prepare for the unexpected. In the simplest terms, I think when you're putting VC plans together, there's always something that you might not have thought of, and this highlights it. And I think the other point is, I think this has given a CIO, particularly reporting into the boards that are resistant to spending money, shall we say. I think this is a great thing to happen, because the CIO's life's just got a little bit easier, I think, in terms of putting business cases together and requesting spend in technology in a whole different variety of areas. So expect the unexpected and be in a better position to put your business cases forward to the boards, because I think they'll be listening now more than ever. It's particularly about traditional things like the RMBC, but also digital transformation in general.
So, how are you, Keith? Biggest lesson learned?
Some of it's the same. I think certainly coming from a finance and data background, we always used to look at our business continuity and ask ourselves, the black swan event question. You've got to plan for an event you can't imagine, and if you can do that, then you're in a pretty safe place. I think the other lessons I'm seeing learned around me, that I hope are lessons that really do carry forward, is business ways of working, and how important a digital strategy is only as good as the business strategy it's there to support. That's what it's about, and not losing sight of that during something like this has been hugely important.
And Adrian, finally on to you, what would you say the biggest lesson has been?
I think it's two things, and one is a lead on from what Keith said. I think understanding your business operating model is really important. When everyone's in the office, I think your business can work, but you may not know how it works. When everyone is disparate, it really pays to understand how your business works. I think secondly, this isn't an event. It's just an ongoing evolving of how we used to operate. And it's going to have multiple peaks, and it's just going to keep changing. And so if you think you solved it, you probably haven't, because what you solved is now changed into a different challenge. So just a series of chapters we're going to have to step through. So understand your business, number one. Secondly, don't think you solved it.
Okay, great. What I'd like to do now is that there have been a couple of questions in the chat, but I'd actually like to invite the people that have written those questions to unmute themselves and kind of contribute them directly. So I think Gordon had a point about equality and equity. If I can see you, I'll unmute you. It's a test of whether you're still listening. Since someone says your name in a meeting, you're like, oh, what? Me?
I muted myself, Martin.
Hi, Gordon.
I think Aidan's already answered it, actually. I think he touched on it in the mixed mode thing. I was just capitalising on something we've been discussing internally, which is because we're a services company, we've got staff working for clients in the secure government space, we've got staff working in our corporate offices, and we've got staff working for people like retailers and so on. Some of those have got young kids, some of those live in mixed families with elderly parents and so on. And they're very used to this HR policy applies to everyone. That's going to go out the window a little bit. Some of those are going to have to accept the fact that the mate they used to work with isn't going to be sitting next to them in the office, and HR and finance are supporting that person differently, as are IT, than they are that person over there. And that's probably, as Adrian alluded to, that's a leadership challenge to get people to accept that. So I think we've probably discussed that one quite well, actually.
I think it's heavy reliance on leadership and acknowledging that the same answer doesn't mean you're being equitable. It's situational leadership, right?
Exactly.
And then question from Martin Hartley about the new normal. So yeah, if you'd like to unmute yourself and pose that question.
Hi.
Hi there.
Can you see me? It works.
Hi, Martin.
Perfect. Hiya. So we've seen loads of really interesting cultural barriers moved as a result of some of the lockdowns. So things like my way of supervising my team is, or not my personally, but there's people in the business whose way of supervising the team is very face-to-face, it's very hands-on. Some work allocation is based on who's in your eye line. We do an awful lot of voluntary travel between offices for internal meetings. And I could imagine a world where either we take a proactive stance and that stops, and we manage some of that out, so we become a more flexible, diverse workforce with people in locations all over the world, potentially not tied to a particular office. Or it will be very easy for people to just revert back to tried and tested behaviours that they've been examining exhibiting for the last 20 years. How proactive are you being about designing a future culture that takes advantage of some of the things you've seen in lockdown?
Certainly from my point of view, we're being very proactive, and a lot of the businesses I work with are too. I think what Adrian mentioned earlier, I don't think we can. I don't think we can rest our laurels on a new normal. I think the new normal is constant change. You know, with working in technology, we've always been used to constant change, but I think this has shown us anything. There's a lot more to come, and a new normal, if there ever is going to be one, is a long way off. So I think organisations that don't quickly and proactively embrace being more flexible and looking at the ways that they work are going to really struggle.
Yeah, I think I'd concur with that. It's back to situational leadership again, and totally agree with Keith. The organisations that revert back to trying to get back to normal how it was will be the ones that probably don't succeed, and the ones that people don't want to work for.
Yeah, it may not change the answer, but I think it will change the starting point of the discussion, if that makes sense. So, you know, I work for a small business. I'm based in Harrogate. Got an office in Leeds, and yet I've been working in London Monday to Friday for probably the last, well, too long, to be honest with you, 18 months, 2 years. Would I need to do that in the future? Does any member of staff have to be in the office? You know, could you buy a cottage in the south of still work in Leeds, metaphorically? I think it's going to add more flexibility, but I'm not quite sure yet that straddles the leadership challenge just yet. So what I think is it allows businesses and groups within those businesses to start that discussion from a different viewpoint. So whereas before it used to be, we're an office-based organisation, tell me why you should work remotely, it's now going to be, well, let's understand if we can make remote work for us. And therefore I think that starting point has shifted constructively, but it doesn't automatically mean it's going to be a right. I think it's up to teams and businesses to work out the right answer for them. But I think it gives more options.
Makes sense, thanks.
Cool. Just coming on to Matt. Matt Tordorf, are you there?
I am, yes. How are you doing?
Oh, yeah. Hello. Good, thanks.
Sorry, I'm carrying on the theme of questions with drum kits in the background.
I know, sir.
The,
concentrate if someone's actually using the drum kit whilst you're on the Zoom call.
so, I mean, there's been some great discussion on leadership and so forth. I'm sorry to bring it back down to a more pragmatic level. So I kind of asked a question around, you know, we're facing a few challenges around end user support at the moment, which we're kind of working through. But, you know, in reality, we've turned from a relatively small footprint organisation to one that's operating out of 900 locations. And that kind of gives you a new challenge from a very pragmatic and distributed sense. You know, so you would now classify some of our broadband consumer broadband suppliers as critical suppliers, you know, so, but obviously we've got no control over that. So is it time to start rethinking, I guess, the traditional thought process around IT support, where it's very much been a case of, you know, have we onboarded something? Do we control it? Do we understand the life cycle about it? But all of a sudden our business is now dependent on things that we've never touched, you know? So it was just a general question around that.
Can I go? Because I think that's a really important question, and not everybody can work from home easily. They don't have the facilities, not just nice offices with drum kits and stuff like that. But from a utilities perspective, I don't have a great internet connection, and at the start of this call I was a little bit worried because the line was struggling a little bit. So there's all considerations like that, which I guess longer term things that impact where and when people can work.
I think it's down to risk, right? So if there's a must-have always-on solution that you need, whether that's a person or a system, then you need to take the call as to how resilient you want that way of working to actually be. So, you know, Matt, we've gone through a very similar situation where the population that our ops team support has suddenly become a massively distributed model. And in actual fact, the op teams that support that model themselves have become distributed. So you end up with this really fragmented framework, you know, and, you know, our help desk, you know, is a small team that work really well together in Leicester. So we thought we'd crack that one, but that's just altered. So, you know, it's a changing way of working for the team, but it's also a change in the model that they're having to support. You know, should or will a business ever want to think about the quality of broadband to each of its people? You know, then clearly the answer to that's probably no. If you've got someone though who is mission critical to either an activity happening at a point in time or to the overall run of the business, that's where I mentioned before, there's an option these days to work from home, but I don't think this alters the status quo on a right to work from home. A business should always have the ability to say, actually, you're mission critical to this. And as long as that conversation is held in a really positive way, then those are the people around which you need to say, therefore, your connection to our business needs to be resilient. Whether that's the case if you work from home, but you've got to be within 10 miles of the office, so if that fails, you can be in the office in 5 or 10 minutes. 5G is around the corner. Whether or not that gives us resilience in terms of the way that you dial into a business, who knows? But, the need of the business in a really constructive way has to come first. The rights of an employee is really shortly behind that. But if the business doesn't survive, it can't employ people. So therefore, I think constructively, the business comes first. But we're going to start to venture into those kinds of conversations. I had a member of my team recently say, can I go and live in Mallorca? Now, I've kind of got no issue with that necessarily, but, the business then starts to take on risk. When everything's working perfectly, that's absolutely fine. But when things start to break down, you can't just nip on a train or nip on a bus to actually get into the office, So risk starts to become a slightly more malleable topic to discuss.
No, thank you.
Hi, Matt, and I agree. I think having come from a place where I've managed multiple distributed sites in international, very different. I had elements of managing all those distributed areas that I knew were safe. And as you were saying, now all of a sudden we might be managing 900 distributed locations, which are people's houses. And it touches on what I said earlier, that what a role performs, not just around how resilient that equipment has to be, but how secure that equipment is. I know from my own, I moved from a farmhouse in the middle of the country not so long ago and was fortunate enough to have private fibre to the door at 1 gig. And now I live in a city where I can only get 11 meg. It's a bit bizarre. And so there's, we can't control those things, and no business will be looking to ensure that everyone's home connection is resilient and robust. And we'll have to ask the questions like Adrian said. And it will span more than just resilience. It will span security too. Is your laptop not just as your connection to your ISP up and running, but is your laptop secure connecting to your router? If your main role is all around secure data, then it might not be the answer that working from home is the future, and it will present challenges for a business to completely accept that.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question? If you do have a question you'd like to pose, if you pop a question mark in the comments box, and I'll invite you to unmute in case you get a mad rush of them. Simon's mentioned that some organisations are mandating corporate teams backgrounds. I've not seen one of those, but I feel that that's a little bit crazy.
Fortunately, everyone's got a bit bored now with changing them. When they first launched that, it got a little bit immature, I have to say. But it has calmed down now.
I quite like the video ones. I've got a running dinosaur, which is quite cool. It's like a dinosaur over my shoulder.
I think that's the thing I was referring to, Martin, but we'll let that go.
Yeah, for the Friday family quiz.
Yeah, for that, that's good.
Cool. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, then I'd just like to invite you to just to each, Dave, Keith, and Adrian, give it a bit of a parting comment in terms of what you think the legacy of COVID-19 will be on IT.
So for me, and I think all three of us have said it, it's about preparedness, it's about flexibility, it's about situational leadership. It's about looking how your business operates, fully understanding it, and being prepared to change and move with the different challenges as they come. And this has been a good starter for a lot of organisations to be able to do that. I think we've got many more challenges to overcome ahead.
Dave?
Yeah, I think just agree with Keith really. I think the real legacy is as tech leaders is it puts us in a different place to have some serious discussions at board level. I think any organisation that doesn't have a strong tech leader advising them is going to certainly need one moving forward, and maybe that's a good thing for a lot of people on this call, because I deal with quite a lot of, especially SMEs that don't have an advisor, kind of CIO, digital kind of leaders who can really steer them in the right direction and get them where they need to be.
I think that's important as well, isn't it? I know lots of people, their first reaction is to look around and there's this urge to know what everyone else is doing about it. I think actually, yeah, having an external advisor.
Yeah, I think so. Again, listening to lots of different. Sorry,
I was saying having an external advisor or being part of a peer-to-peer networking group, I think can be really beneficial for that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's as I said earlier, we had a series of about 12 CIOs from different sectors talking to the group about their experiences and what they were doing, but different levels of kind of representation at board level and influence.
Okay, great. And finally, Adrian, what do you think the legacy is?
I'm struggling with that one. I think the legacy has been to say that actually coping with this situation hasn't been too difficult from a technology point of view. But I think we've got a lot of opportunity and challenges coming up because in many ways we've delayed some of those elements. It's not a tech answer, but underlying all of that is the fact that working with our teams and our people has just become a whole lot more important. That would be my thought.
Excellent. Okay, great. We'll wrap up there. So first of all, I'd like to extend my thanks to everyone that joined today. Hope you've enjoyed it and found it a valuable discussion. Extra special thanks to Dave, Keith and Adrian. So thank you for being part of the panel.
Yeah.
As I mentioned at the start, this is one of a series of webinars that we've been putting together that's called Lockdown Learning. And we're really open to ideas in terms of topics that you'd like to explore, or maybe someone has something that they'd actually like to be present on a panel for, or even present to a wider audience. So please do get in touch with us if you've got any ideas around that. And make sure you follow us on LinkedIn so that you can see the other interesting events that are coming up and join us on those as well. So thanks again. I always find the end of these online meetings a little bit awkward because it's not like we can just, put the last slide on and all go for a beer. So you just have to kind of back away slowly and say, thank you very much. It's been great. A pleasure to host you. And thanks again to the panel.
Thanks, Martin.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.